Okay, and then we talked a little bit about how emotion might work too, and so we say, well, you're in this little motivated state, so it tells you something about where you are and what that's like, and it gives you some hints about where you might go with that, and it disinhibits the relevant behaviors that would be associated with that, including perceptual behaviors. And then you walk forward, and well, what happens? Well, two things roughly can happen. Things you want, which indicate A, that you're moving towards the goal, and B, that your plan is good, right? It indicates both, and that's positive emotion, right? That's incentive reward, that's dopaminergically mediated, and you like that, as long as it's not too intense. And then the next thing that can happen is two things. It can be divided into two. There are things you don't want to have happen, and some of those are, well, there's just an obstacle in your way, and with a minor deviation in terms of trajectory you can walk around it. And then the other is something you completely don't understand happens, and it just knocks the bottom out of your stupid plan. And then it also might knock the bottom out of all sorts of other plans as well, depending on how unexpected it is. And that seems to me to be where the transition from order to chaos occurs. So we use a relationship example again. You go home to invite your girlfriend out to have dinner, and you find out that she's in bed with someone else. It's like, well, dinner's off. Right, okay. But that's not all that's off, right? So then you might think, okay, well, there's a lot of things all of a sudden that are off, because that's a much bigger catastrophe than if she says, well, I already made dinner, and, you know, maybe you're a little irritated because you can't take her out now, and you have to eat something else. It's like, oh, well, that's not such a catastrophe. But it's not easy to figure out exactly why those catastrophes differ, because they're both unexpected things. And so then you have to think, well, one of them seems to disrupt a lot more than the other. And then you have to think, well, disrupt what? And then that's why I talked to you guys about this. Because and this is Piagetian in some sense. I think this is the way to understand why you get upset when you get upset. It's like, okay, well, you know, you wanted to take your girlfriend out for dinner, and you know how to do that. You go into the elevator, you take the elevator down, you eat, you pay, you know, it's behaviorally plotted out quite well. And so there's a bunch of behaviors at the bottom, and then there's the, you know, the label, go out for dinner, and it's a little thing down at the bottom, and it gets disrupted, and so you're sort of upset in proportion to that little bit of territory that's been bent astray. And maybe if you're not too emotionally unstable or neurotic, maybe it's a pretty seamless transition, you know. Whereas if you're, say, emotionally stable and extroverted, you think, oh, good, something new, you know. So, and both of those responses are understandable. All right, but when it's, you know, your partner's in bed with someone else, it's sort of more like at the top, which is, well, your conception of the quality of your life, or the overall quality of you even. And when something major happens, it's like it blows apart, potentially blows apart your entire structure. Partly your conceptual structure, because like, well, what the hell did you know? Like, how stupid could you possibly be? And that tells you exactly how stupid you could be. But then you start to wonder about why it happened to you. And partly that's because you're stupid, or at least that's what you think. But then it's also because, well, maybe there's a whole bunch of skills that you don't have. Like, you know, if you were a better person, if you were more interesting, if you went, you know, more places, if you were more caring, if you weren't quite as selfish, if you were more conscientious, right? Because then you start to think, well, what do I lack? It's not only what have I misperceived, it's what do I lack? And when you get hit at a high level, like your partner betrays you, it's like you're infinitely stupid and you're infinitely worthless. And that's chaos. And so then you're in chaos, and well, what then do you do? Well, the best answer to that is you avoid it to begin with. You take the steps along the way that decrease the probability that you're ever going to end up there. And that's, in some sense, that's what that means. So, you know, if you look at this conceptualization, you can kind of see you're moving from point A to point B, and then the unpredicted outcome is like a hole. in your plan. It's like that's not supposed to happen, because if you had a good plan, something you didn't want to have happen wouldn't have happened. And so it's like a hole in your plan, and then you fall through the hole and you find out how big the hole is. And maybe it's a hole that just ate that plan, and so who cares? Or maybe it's the kind of hole that just keeps growing until all of you falls into it. All right, so how do you deal with that as a possibility, especially given that you have limited knowledge? And so that's what this means. And this is the same thing, basically, as the Taoist representation. Because the Taoist representation, Tao also means meaning, eh? And so being on that line between chaos and order is meaningful. And the Taoists believe that you should be where things are meaningful. That's the right place to be. And you think, well, it's a good place to be if you think about it, about, you know, your own experience. When you're doing something meaningful, you think, you don't even think about it. It's just, this is a good place to be. You can notice it, and maybe you can notice it and continue to do it more, and that's what the existentialists would call striving for an authentic existence. You know, and you can think about that as, well, it's philosophy. It's like, no, don't be thinking that. It's advice about how to structure your life so that its quality is sufficient, so that you don't become resentful and full of hate. Like, it's not casual, well, here's some philosophical ideas to think about. It's like, you got to take this seriously, because if you don't, not only do you not have a good time, because you just aren't paying any attention, but you'll also turn into the sort of person who's highly motivated to make sure that no one else ever has a good time as well. And so you go from just kind of being useless and miserable on your own, when that becomes sufficiently useful and meaningless and painful, then you're undoubtedly going to start to dream about taking it out on all the other people whose fault it is that you're unfulfilled and miserable. And so it doesn't, if you don't stay in that meaningful place, so to speak, so that your life is acceptable to you, you don't think that you're the only one who will suffer. You're just the beginning of the suffering.